Now, if you're having a little bit of trouble wrapping your mind around absolute references versus relative references, don't worry, there's actually another option you can use that may be a little bit easier for you to swallow. And that option is named ranges. The idea behind a named range is that instead of using a cell's address, for example A1, as the reference, you actually name cell A1 to a common name that you're familiar with. At that point, that range is locked. Then you can use that particular name in any formula that you can come up with. Let's go through one quick example of this. Remember this tax rate I have here in cell M2? Right now, the cell address of that is M2. Instead of M2, I'd like to have a common name, a name that I can remember. And I want to call this rate. So in order to name this particular cell rate, I can go up to the Formulas tab, click on Define Name, and it's going to open up a new dialog box for me called the New Name dialog. Now you see how Excel tries to fill in what the name should be based on any kind of label? Well, that's great and all, but that's not what I want to call my cell or range. I actually want to name this rate. So I'm going to type in rate. Now you'll notice in the dialog box here, and I'll move it down so you can see it, it has a scope, and this scope states that this particular range will be valid for this workbook. Your other options are Sheet 1 and the sheet called Formula Basics. But I want this particular range to be valid throughout the whole workbook, so I'll select Workbook. I could put a comment here if I wanted to. And then I can define what cell that this particular name refers to. By default, you'll have the cell that you're clicked on. Now, in this example, I've only got one cell. I can actually start naming multiple cells. I can name a whole range of cells. I can name cell A1 through A8. I can name cell B1 through B17. Once you've got a cell reference here or a reference to a cell, click OK. Now the thing to note here is the name box. The name box in the formula bar now says rate. If I move over a cell, that particular cell says N2. That's the name of that cell, is N2. If I click back over to cell M2, I see the name rate. This is the name I gave it. At this point, I can use this name in any formula. So let's go ahead and retype the formula for L2. So instead of saying H3 times M2 with an absolute reference, I can change this, and I'll change it in the formula bar here. Now you'll notice that when I type in rate, I'll have a little context menu here with a tag icon next to it. This basically means that this particular item in this context menu is a named range. I'll press the Enter key, and the results are the same. Now, look at my formula. It's H3 times rate. It's not H3 times M2, it's H3 times rate. And the formula works because we've given this particular cell, cell M2, the name of rate. And you can tell that by looking in the name box. Now to see the benefit of this name range, I'm going to copy this down and paste it to lines 4 through 8. Now each cell in this range has the reference to the revenue times rate. And the formula works. I didn't have to use any absolute references. I didn't have to manipulate the formula. All I simply did was reference the revenue cell and multiplied it by the named range rate.